Today we're going to talk about wide-angle lenses for the Fujifilm X system. Alright guys, so welcome back. This is Dylan Golby, photographer here in Seoul again. I'm here with my pal Roy from Tongyong, South Korea.
Yo, good to be back on your channel.
Yeah, we've had Roy here for the X-H1 review, so it's good fun to be doing stuff in another city this time, yeah?
Of course, yeah. Good to be in Seoul. Air quality is bad today.
Abysmal, 178 on the air quality index, which...
but we're making do, washing that weird taste in my mouth with some beer. So.
Yeah, excellent, yeah. Right. So we're here to talk about wide-angle lenses for the Fuji. We have almost all of them today. The one that we couldn't get that neither of us owns is actually the 14mm f2.8. Ran into Fuji to try and get it yesterday and they're closed for renovations. So unfortunately we don't have that, but we'll try and make a follow-up to talk about that as well. So, all right. Yeah, so we're going to start with the widest of the bunch, which is the 9mm f2.80D from Laowa. We reviewed this a couple of weeks ago on the channel, so go back and check that out. But today we'll be comparing it to all of the other options that we have with us. So yeah, we'll go on to the next widest that we have, which is actually Fujifilm's 10-24 f4. Possibly one of the benefits of this guy is that it's a zoom, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. The next up would be...
my favorite lens, my favorite wide-angle lens ever so far. The Samyang 12mm f2.0. Mine's a silver one.
We're going to see if we can knock that favorite out.
Okay,
today.
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see about that.
Okay. And the next two that we actually have with us are, we're going to go from basically 9mm to 16mm, which would be kind of ultra wide to wide. And the next one that we have is the 16mm f1.4, which we're most interested to compare to that guy.
Dylan hates this lens.
It's too big. It's too heavy.
This is the 16 to 55 f2.8 zoom, pro zoom from Fuji, and I personally love this lens for travel and documentary work. It's just an all-in-one sort of lens solution, but it does go to 16mm, so it's in this Shootout.
Yes. So basically, we're going to head out and we're going to shoot some photos with each of these lenses. And we're going to start by looking at simple things like just how wide is each of the lenses, what sort of a difference does it make. The next thing we're going to look at is sort of the build quality and how it feels in the hand, how it fits on the Fujifilm system, as we do have a couple of off-brand lenses. So we're going to sort of get an idea of how they fit into the X system. We're also going to talk a little bit about sharpness. We'll look at things like a vignette. When you're looking at Fuji lenses, they get corrected in the camera, but for these two, we're going to be looking at just how much they vignette and how much of an issue is that. And we're also going to look at sharpness, both the center and the corners. And I guess the final thing we'll talk about is, price and versatility. Is it worth you spending, say, $900 on this guy versus $500 on this guy?
Or $300
$300 on that guy. So we'll talk a little bit about all those things. So. First up, we're going to go with the Laowa 9mm, which is the widest of the bunch, and we'll just take the focal length down from there to 10 to 16, or to 12 and then to 16, and just show you the difference in the field of view.
Alright, so up next we have the Samyang 12mm, one of my favorite wide-angle lenses, and we'll see how it looks.
We've just shot a series of pictures under the bridge here to give you guys an idea of the field of view that each of these lenses have. As we're typically bombarded in the world with, this is a 15mm, which is, a 22.5mm equivalent on this format. So we're going to look at just how wide 9, 10, 12, and 16mm are, and we've done that by keeping the camera on the tripod and just shooting the same frame with each lens. So first up, let's take a look at the Laowa, the widest of the lot. If you take a look in the bottom corner, you'll actually see the rocks, which are part of the riverside, sort of in the corner of the frame, which you won't see in any of the others. And take a look at the amount of space on each side of the pillars of this bridge, and you'll get an idea of just how wide that lens is.
You gotta be careful with that lens.
You got to be careful with that lens, right? So those pillars are probably, I would say, 10 meters. That was a gentleman with a rather loud motorcycle. Those pillars are probably 10 meters in front of us, so that'll give you an idea of just how wide this lens is. The next one we did was the 10 to 24, in which you no longer see the rocks at the side, and there's a little less of a gap.
You gotta take note of the big difference between 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
For
right?
ultra wide, not 1 millimeter difference.
It's
huge.
It's huge, yeah. The next thing you'll notice is with the 12. Now this is your preferred focal. Why do you prefer this focal length, man?
It's just the way I see things. It just works really well with how I see it. And just I can pre-visualize with this lens. Maybe it's the time I spent with it, but I also, when I first got the lens, it was just really natural too. So I think that the 18 millimeter equivalent is really
with
good.
Equivalents, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, the 18 millimeter equivalent on the Fujifilm GFX, we were talking about this earlier, is actually the 23 f4, and that is actually my favorite lens from the Fujifilm GFX system.
Yeah.
I love it for some environmental portraits. It's a fantastic lens.
So pretty much the same angle of view.
Same angle of view. So I think that angle of view it feels very. It's the way I see the world, I think, in terms of environmental portraits.
Yeah. It's the same thing for me with the Samyang. It just feels natural to me using that lens. So I definitely love it.
And the next one we did, obviously, was the 216 millimeters. So I had my 16 millimeter 1.4, and we had the 16 to 50,
which was very interesting. 16 to 55.
55, sorry. Yeah.
But that was very interesting because you actually see that there's a difference. There's a significant difference between the two. They're both 16, but the
angle of view is slightly different.
The angle of view is a little different on the 16 to 55. So just an interesting find.
Yeah. But otherwise, I mean, they're both going to give you roughly the same results. It's only when you get to the really wide end that you're going to see huge differences in angle of view.
Yeah, but from exactly the same place, on the same tripod, the same camera,
mounting the lens,
it was slightly different. So that was really interesting to see.
The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to test the vignettes of the different lenses. So we've got the camera currently pointed at a bright blue sky, which will give us a fairly even illumination across the frame. We're going to shoot all of the lenses at their wide open aperture and then at f11, just to see how it looks when it's wide open, but also when we stop it down to a typical aperture that we might use for something like a landscape. There is a gentleman rolling through here with his horns.
Rolling.
And 15 different phones. That man is ballin'.
Baller!
Okay, so we just finished up the vignette test. I think maybe the two lenses that we want to talk about are the off-brand, the third-party lenses. So have a chat about your fave, the 12 millimeter. I mean,
okay,
have a look at that vignette for us.
Yeah. So if you take a look at the vignette on the 12 millimeter, it's not bad. Maybe you can see it, definitely see it in the corners. But if you're shooting astro or shallow depth of field, you're not gonna really care about that. But when you stop down, if you look at f11, it looks perfect.
It's perfect.
Yeah. So no complaints about the vignetting on the Samyang.
Let's talk a little bit about the Laowa 9mm. Wide open. It's a few stops. Like if there's something dark in the corners of your frame, you're going to lose it completely. There'll be no pulling that back. You can look a little bit more in detail about that in my full review of the Laowa 9mm, but it's a significant 3 to 4 stop difference between the corners and the center. Once you're down to f11, It's not so bad. It's dealable now. Like you can get into software and you can correct that fairly easily.
But surprisingly, there's still a vignette.
There's still a vignette
at f11.
Yeah. And once you get beyond f11, actually down to 16 and 22, that vignette starts to creep back in. So it is something that you're always going to have to deal with the lower 9mm. We won't let that detract from the overall quality of the lens, though, because as you'll see, it's pretty spectacular.
It's a damn good lens.
It's a damn good lens, yeah. We just wrapped up doing a quick, non-scientific, real-world sharpness test with all of these lenses, and we focused to infinity with each one, which is kind of pretty close to where you're going to be focusing with most of these wide-angle lenses most of the time. In terms of the way they performed in the center, let's start with the wide guy. Laowa 9mm f2.8. Looking at the shot you're seeing on the screen now, I'd say it's pretty good wide open. I mean, that is as good as you need a wide-angle lens to be. Lines are sharp, contrast is good. I would say things look pretty good there. Next up would be the 10 to 24mm, this guy. Again, I would say it's pretty good. I wouldn't have any issues shooting this thing wide open if what I needed to be sharp was in the corners. How do you feel about the 12mm?
All right, so
with a caveat.
We checked the photos that we took for the test. Now, the f2 photo for the Samyang is actually out of focus, which is actually a good learning point because with the Samyangs, I've used this since 2014, 2015 maybe. But the thing that I noticed with the Samyang is you need to find where your infinity is. So I don't know if it's manufacturing fault or just just a problem with accuracy and precision. But I've received a lot of questions online about my images aren't sharp, my photos are soft. So this test actually illustrates that very nicely because when Dylan was doing the test, so what happened was Dylan actually, he set it to the infinity setting, which is on the lens, but it's not actually on infinity. So the first shot that you're going to see on here is out of focus. So like I said, you need to find the infinity on your particular lens. Now, even with focus peaking, the camera will think that it's in focus, and it'll give you the focus peaking highlights, but you'll need to do really more in-depth tests to see where your infinity is. Now, for this particular lens, I found that infinity is actually a little bit before the line. So, anyway, the point is with the Samyang is it's easy to miss infinity. It's easy to miss the proper infinity setting. So they are very sharp lenses. I can say that at f2 the sharpness is acceptable, as you saw in the Astro photo, and we'll put up another test to follow up with this, maybe flash some images on the screen now. But overall, I would say that if you decide to buy a Samyang lens, you need to find where exactly infinity is to be able to maximize the sharpness of this lens.
Yeah.
So at f2, in our test, of course, it was out of focus, but again, just find your infinity and you should be at acceptable sharpness. f11 is pretty damn sharp.
I think in the center, we're not even talking here about stopping down. In the center, all of these lenses are fantastic. Once you stop down to f11, if you can tell the difference between the center and these lenses, you're probably looking a little too close. Your focus is not on what's in the image, but micro contrast and things like that. So if you're really, really looking deep, you could probably find some differences, but even wide open, I think these lenses are all great.
Yeah.
Let's talk about corners, man. Let's start from the beginning again. We'll go from the 9mm. This guy, the Laowa 9mm, in the corners is fairly soft. I think I would call it the softest of the bunch, wide open. It's pretty soft in the corners. Having said that, though, when you stop down to f11, you'd be hard pressed to notice the difference between this, the Samyang, and also the 10 to 24. Once it's stopped down, it's a really good performer. But yeah, wide open, I'd be very careful about putting anything in the corners of this lens that you want to be able to see detail. Yeah. 10 to 24, I think we sort of spoke about it there. Corners are great at 4. They're good at 4. They're excellent at f11. Between these two lenses, the 9mm and the 10 to 24, you can't really see much of a difference at f11. The Samyang?
Alright, the Samyang, as I said, it's okay in the corners. There's some corner softness, but when you stop down to f11, sharp as sharp can be.
It is, and I think honestly the contrast out of that is what surprised me. Versus even both of these lenses, the contrast out of the Samyang is it makes it seem sharper. It gives it a more three-dimensional feel in the corners, I think, and that's pixel peeping. Like all of these are great, but the Samyang I felt had a slight edge, and we'll throw that on the screen for you.
Right.
In terms of the 16mm,
16mm. What did you think about that?
it's sharp wide open. The corner detail is pretty damn close to what you will see in the center, which I found to be pretty incredible.
Right.
Once it's stopped down, I mean, again, the stopping down in the corners, it makes us a little more of a difference, just in terms of contrast and all of it. But it's still a very, very small difference. How about that?
At 1.4.
At 1.4, right? When you stop down, it's even sharper in the
That's
corners,
amazing.
right?
That's amazing.
Let's talk about that 2.8, man. The 16 to 55.
So the 16 to 55 again, wide open. Corners are pretty sharp. At f11, gets even better. So no complaints about sharpness on the wide end of this one.
Right. I would say that that's another one of those, like the Sigma 20 to 35, 24 to 35, sorry, f2. I would say this is another one of those zooms that falls into that it's a prime that zooms category.
Yeah.
It's extremely sharp.
I've definitely heard that comparison said before online. It's basically on prime level sharpness.
Yeah.
Based on the test, you really can't go wrong with any of these lenses.
In terms of sharpness, yeah?
In terms of sharpness.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about versatility. And I think that's one of the major points where you're going to really see a difference in these lenses for most situations, is that some of them are more usable than others. Some of them are more versatile. They can be used in more situations. I think that, honestly, the clear loser here is the Laowa 9mm. It's extremely wide, and that makes it useful for very specific situations. It makes it useful for things like really emphasizing your foreground, wide vistas, or tight spaces where you might need an extreme wide angle. Otherwise, I don't think it's that useful. In comparison, I think the 12mm is a good one to talk about.
Yeah. Actually, the 12mm is, in my mind, just right there on the, within the range of useful wide angle. It's right on the edge of that, and whenever I bring this lens up to my eye, it's the scene still looks good. There's no super crazy distortion.
Right.
It's just wide enough to be useful.
Yeah, in terms of probably the next most versatile lens, I'm going to say that would be the 16 1.4.
Right.
The focal length being, as you would say, a 24mm equivalent, makes it a fairly wide-angle lens, but this 1.4 aperture gives it a lot more versatility in terms of being able to shoot, a narrow depth of field environmental portrait, being able to stop it down and shoot some wide-angle landscape. That sort of thing makes it a really, really versatile lens. You can also use it in low light because of the wide aperture. I'd say this is a really versatile lens.
Yeah.
the next two that we want to talk about. Do you want me to talk about this guy?
We're going to get to the winners of this category. The winners of the versatility category are definitely the zooms. For obvious reasons, right? So we've got the 10 to 24.
I would say this is number 2. I think this is definitely your most versatile lens.
And the 16 to 55 f2.8.
And again, this is a caveat based on what we shoot.
Yeah.
Typically, as a person who maybe shoots a lot of seascapes with foreground elements that are really important, perhaps this is the more versatile lens. But for the things that Roy and I shoot, a mix of corporate events, couples, families, and also some landscape and travel stuff, we think that this is definitely the most versatile lens.
I've done a whole editorial assignment, a whole magazine feature with this lens.
Yesterday.
It was yesterday.
It was yesterday. There you go.
And it's just between the focal length of 24 to 85, which are very useful focal lengths, and the fast f2.8 aperture, this lens is the workhorse. It's just hands down the lens I could take on a trip, on an assignment, and just do almost everything with.
So next up, we're going to have a chat about build quality, size, and weight. Now this is regardless of how versatile the lens might be, how sharp it is, we're just looking at this one sort of component of how is the lens built. So again, let's just go through them in order, I think. Let's go through with the 9mm to start with. This lens, it's built like a tank. It's built very, very well. It's all metal construction. It all feels like it's machined very well. It's got a slight scratchiness to the turn of the focus ring. The aperture ring is kind of irritating in the sense that it only goes full stops. It will not do third stops. Those are probably the two caveats to this. It's not technically weather sealed if you're looking at that, but if you look at our review of the lower 9mm, we were pretty much in a typhoon. I mean, it was raining the entire time we were using this. The sea spray hit this, knocked it over, and it's fine. It's very, very well built. The things that could potentially make this better are in the way that it feels to use it, I think. Otherwise, it's a very, very well built lens. Size and weight, I mean, it's tiny, it's light. It fits. This is one thing that none of these other lenses will do, is it will fit just about anywhere. So I think the thing that maybe sets the Fuji native lenses apart from the others is how seamlessly they fit to the Fuji bodies. If that's a concern for you in terms of build quality, I think that's a really important point. All the aperture rings turn the same way. All the rubbers and the metals used are the same thing. They feel like a seamless part of the Fuji bodies. The 10-24 being no exception there. Possibly the only worry about the build quality would be the aperture ring. If you are looking at a Fujifilm lens, this is a free spinning aperture ring. It doesn't have marked stops. You just have to read it through the viewfinder and turn it back and forth until you're happy with where you are. Otherwise, though, I think it's an excellently built lens.
Next up, we have a Samyang 12mm. I would say that this lens is built pretty well, very similar to the Laowa build. It's all metal. The aperture ring goes the same direction as the Fuji's, which is good. I've taken this in rain, in snow. It's not weather sealed technically, but it's fine. And actually, the price is low enough so that if you do damage it, or if you lose it, you can just get another one.
Right. So let's talk about price for a second here. The cheapest lens is the Samyang 12mm. And it seems that might be the best value for money.
Oh, yeah. This retails for about $3.99. You can get it for $2.99 or even less when there's a sale going on. And it's just really good value for money.
I think that, yeah, definitely. As you were saying earlier, like the versatility of that focal length is what makes that price so attractive. The 18mm sort of equivalent makes that a much more versatile lens than something like the Laowa 9mm, which is actually priced a little bit higher. This is $4.99 at its retail price, and that's a great price for this. There's nothing wrong with the price for this lens, but in terms of versatility, I think that makes this a more attractive option in terms of price. So the clear winner is definitely the Samyang. Yeah,
Samyang is the winner for the price category.
Yeah.
The other lenses, this is around $1,200 US.
Yeah. Both of these guys are $999.
If you want a relatively cheap, fast aperture, small, sharp, wide lens, go for the Samyang. And check out my review on it on my blog.
Okay guys, so we're getting ready to wrap this up. I feel like we've thrown a whole bunch of technical details at you. Neither of us is particularly fond of technical details, but we realize that it is important. We're in a technical craft. It is a merging between your art, your love, and what a lens is able to produce for you. So we're going to then wrap up just basically with our favorite lens from this set, to give you guys an idea of what we would typically use for a certain thing. So Roy, I'm going to let you start with that. That was an easy choice.
Easy choice. My personal favorite from this set, sorry Samyang, I love you, but for versatility and sharpness and just one lens solution, the closest one lens solution I can think of at the moment is the 16 to 55 f2.8.
Okay. I'm going to throw mine out to be the 16 1.4. Now, for me, versatility typically comes in depth of field and usability in low light, things like that. I don't typically use zoom lenses. I don't like the options that gives me when I'm on location. I'm a fairly scattered person, so I don't like to be able to choose between 12 different focal lengths as I zoom. I much prefer to know, okay, that's on my camera, this is what I'm going to get, what can I do while I have this on my camera? And for me, the 16mm really, really shines in this because it gives you that options with depth of field, but it also gives you wide angle but not wide angle kind of feel. It's wide enough that it doesn't cause huge amounts of distortion, and I feel like that is clear winner for me in terms of, this is definitely the one that I use most often.
Now, I would definitely agree with you regarding you have so many options from here to here. Sometimes it can be distracting.
So let's wrap that up here. You've heard some technical details. You've also heard about the lenses that we perhaps love the most. Let's throw at you guys